The air in the room tastes of sulfur and burnt paper, a sharp, acrid sting that lingers at the back of the throat. It is a smell of destruction, of a lifetime's work turned to gray flakes of ash that drift upward in the heat of the hearth. Outside the window of Trinity College, the Cambridge night is heavy and silent, indifferent to the catastrophe unfolding within these stone walls. A single candle, knocked askew by a small, startled dog, has done what no rival mathematician or religious inquisitor could ever achieve. It has erased the secrets of the universe. Isaac Newton stands frozen in the center of the room. He does not scream. He does not weep. He simply watches the flames devour the stacks of parchment, his eyes reflecting the dying orange light. These were not the calculations of gravity, nor the diagrams of optics that would one day make him a saint of science. These were the other papers, the crimson notes, the translations of emerald tablets and the recipes for the transmutation of the soul. For 20 years, he had labored in the suffocating heat of his furnace, inhaling the fumes of mercury and arsenic, seeking the thread that connected the motion of the planets to the beating of the human heart. He believed he was chosen to decode the language of God, a language written not in calculus, but in fire. And now it is gone. The silence that rushes back into the room after the fire dies down is heavier than before. It is the silence of a man who realizes that the door to the absolute has slammed shut. History will remember him as the architect of reason, the man who brought order to a chaotic world. They will build statues of him holding a prism, gazing nobly at the stars, but they will not see the burns on his hands. They will not see the madness that crawls at the edges of his vision, born from nights spent bargaining with chemicals that promised eternal life, but delivered only poison. He falls into a chair, the wood groaning under the weight of his despair. The world sees a scientist, the shadows know a sorcerer. He was never truly a man of the age of reason. He was a child of an older, darker time, desperately trying to prove that the universe was not a machine, but a riddle. To understand Isaac Newton is to step away from the light of the Enlightenment and descend into the cellar where the furnace roars. It is to realize that the man who defined gravity spent half his life trying to defy it. The apple did not fall. It was pulled down by the same heavy, invisible hand that now rests upon his shoulder. The fire has dimmed, but the embers still glow with a faint, dangerous heat. Keep your candle lit and step closer to the desk where the charred remnants of the truth remain. Chapter 1. The Ash of the Great Work. The fire is dead, but the room is still breathing. It exhales the heavy, suffocating scent of scorched vellum and melting wax, a thick fog that clings to the curtains and settles into the wool of Isaac Newton's coat. The heat has leached out of the stones of Trinity College, replaced by the damp chill of a Cambridge winter morning, yet Newton does not shiver. He does not move. He stands amidst the ruins of his own intellect, watching the gray flakes of ash settle like black snow upon the floorboards, covering his boots in the dust of 20 years. The silence that fills the chamber is absolute, a vacuum more terrifying than the empty spaces between the stars he once sought to measure. It is the silence of a library where every book has been erased, the silence of a cathedral where the altar has been smashed. In the corner of the room, a small spaniel named Diamond cowers beneath a table, whimpering softly. The dog knows it has done something wrong, though it cannot comprehend the magnitude of the catastrophe. A simple jump, a playful bound, a candle tipped onto a stack of loose papers. That was all it took. In the mythology of science, this moment is often recounted with a gentle, almost whimsical shake of the head, a fable about the absent-minded professor and his pet. "O Diamond, Diamond," Newton is said to have whispered, staring at the blaze, "thou little knowest the mischief thou hast done." But the legend softens the horror. It scrubs away the madness. There was no whimsy in that room. There was only the sound of a mind snapping, a fracture running through the bedrock of a genius who realized that the bridge he had built to God had just burned down. What lay in that pile of ash was not the Principia. It was not the neat, orderly calculus that defined the motion of planets or the trajectory of cannonballs. The world already had those. The world applauded those. No, what burned were the crimson notes, the chemical writings, the translations of forgotten manuscripts that Newton believed contained the Principia Sapientia, the original, pristine wisdom revealed by God to the ancients. He believed that Moses was a physicist, that the temples of Solomon were coded blueprints of the universe, and that he, Isaac Newton, had finally deciphered the riddle. He had spent decades in the suffocating heat of his private furnace, his hair turning gray, his skin soaking up mercury, chasing the thread of truth that linked the material to the spiritual. And now, the thread was cut. He falls to his knees, not in prayer but in exhaustion, his hands hovering over the blackened debris. He tries to read the fragments, but the ink has turned to smoke. The formulas for the transmutation of metals, the chronologies that predicted the end of days, the secrets of the active spirit that animated the cosmos, they are all gone. It is a loss that feels physical, like an amputation. To the Royal Society, Newton is a titan of reason, a man of marble and logic. But here, in the dark, he is a sorcerer whose grimoire has been destroyed. He knows that he cannot rewrite them. The inspiration for those texts came from a feverish, divine state of grace that has long since left him. He is old now. The fire is out. The sun begins to rise over the college, casting a pale, indifferent light across the destruction. Students are waking up in their dormitories, preparing for lectures on Aristotle and Euclid, unaware that the man who rewrote the laws of nature is sitting on his floor weeping dry, silent tears. They see the Cambridge Don, the respected Lucasian professor. They do not see the heretic who spent his nights talking to the prophets. The destruction of the papers in 1693 does not just mark the loss of work, it marks the beginning of the Black Year, a descent into paranoia and sleeplessness where Newton will lose his grip on reality itself. He looks at the dog, then at the window. The universe outside is vast, cold, and mechanical. Without his alchemical keys, it is a prison. He has explained how the planets move, but without the papers that now coat his hands in soot, he can no longer explain why. The room begins to cool as the hearth fire burns down to embers, but the stench of the accident remains, hanging in the air like a phantom. Newton reaches out a trembling hand to touch the black drift of ash on his desk. It is light, almost weightless, crumbling into a fine gray powder at the slightest pressure of his fingertip. It is a terrifying paradox. How can 20 years of labor, 20 years of communion with the divine, weigh less than a breath? He rubs the soot between his thumb and forefinger, staining his skin with the carbonized remains of the Principia Sapientia. He had believed that he was rewriting the history of the world, that he was restoring the lost knowledge of the Babylonians and the Egyptians. Now, he is simply a man with dirty hands in a cold room. The tragedy of this morning is not merely academic, it is theological. To Newton, science was not a profession, it was a form of worship. He did not study the universe to exploit it, but to read the mind of its creator. The manuscripts that just vanished into smoke were his prayers. They contained his calculations on the dimensions of Solomon's temple, which he believed was a diagram of the heavens. They held his translations of the Emerald Tablet, the secret recipes for the star Regulus of antimony, and the steps to create the philosophical mercury that would dissolve gold and reveal the spirit within. He had walked the razor's edge between genius and heresy, keeping these papers hidden from the prying eyes of the Anglican Church and the Royal Society. They were his covenant with God, and God, it seems, has rejected the offering. He stands up slowly, his joints stiff from the long night of horror. He walks to the window and looks out at the great court of Trinity. The geometric order of the architecture, the neatly trimmed grass, the stone fountain, it all looks mocking now. It is a world of surfaces, a world of dead matter moving according to dead laws. He has given the world the Principia. He has given them the laws of motion and gravity. But he knows, with a sinking heart, that these are merely the descriptions of the cage. The alchemical papers were the key to the lock. Without them, the universe is just a clockwork mechanism, ticking endlessly into a void, devoid of the living, breathing spirit he had tried so desperately to capture in his retorts. A deep, crushing melancholia begins to settle over him, a fog thicker than the one outside. This is the beginning of the unraveling. In the weeks and months to come, the sharp, diamond-hard intellect of Isaac Newton will fracture. He will stop eating. He will stop sleeping. He will pace this room for days on end, muttering to people who are not there, convinced that his friends are conspiring against him, that the very air is poisoned. The fire has not just burned his work. It has burned away the barrier between his mind and the abyss. He turns back to the room, looking at the empty desk. The sun is fully up now, a cold, white disk in the winter sky. The world is awake. The merchants are opening their shops, the students are rushing to chapel. Life continues, indifferent to the catastrophe. Newton creates a fist, his fingernails digging into the soot-stained palm. He is the most famous man in Europe, yet he has never been more invisible. He is the last of the Sumerians, the last of the Magi, stranded in a century that cares only for machines. He closes his eyes, trying to recall the formulas, the precise weight of the sulfur, the color of the flame at the moment of transmutation. But it is fading. The memory is like smoke, drifting out of reach, leaving him alone with the gravity he defined, pulling him down, down, down. Chapter 2. The Solitary Boy of Wolsthorpe. To understand the fire that would one day consume his life's work, one must first understand the ice. One must travel back from the cloisters of Cambridge to the desolate, wind-swept flatlands of Lincolnshire, where the horizon stretches out endlessly, gray and unbroken, pinning the earth beneath a vast, oppressive sky. Here, in the hamlet of Woolsthorpe, stands a limestone manor house that feels less like a home and more like a fortress against the elements. It is a place of shadows and drafts, of cold stone floors and silence. And in the center of this silence sits a child who has already learned the most painful lesson the universe has to offer, that people leave, but the laws of nature remain. Isaac Newton was born on Christmas Day, 1642, an infant so tiny that his mother famously remarked he could fit inside a quart mug. He was born prematurely, a fragile, gasping thing that was not expected to survive the night. He entered the world with the odds stacked against him, breathing air that was already thick with grief. His father, an illiterate yeoman farmer also named Isaac, had died 3 months before the boy took his first breath. From the very beginning, Newton was a ghost in his own life, bearing the name of a dead man, occupying a space that felt borrowed. He was a posthumous child, a footnote to a tragedy, growing up in a house where the walls seemed to hold the memory of the father he never knew. But the true wound, the fracture that would never heal, was not the death of his father. It was the departure of his mother. When Isaac was 3 years old, Hannah Eiskopf made a decision that would warp the architecture of her son's soul forever. She married a wealthy, 63-year-old rector named Barnabas Smith from a neighboring village. The arrangement was transactional, practical, and cruel. Smith wanted a wife, but he did not want the scrawny, intense toddler she came with. And so Hannah left. She packed her belongings, walked out the door of Woolsthorpe Manor to live with her new husband, and left Isaac behind in the care of his grandmother. She did not look back. For 7 years, Isaac lived just 1.5 miles away from his mother, close enough to see the smoke rising from the chimney of her new home, yet forbidden from being part of her life. The psychological violence of this abandonment cannot be overstated. It turned the boy inward, calcifying his heart. He learned that love was conditional, that intimacy was dangerous, and that the only things he could rely on were the things he could build with his own hands. He stood in the garden of Woolsthorpe, a small, solitary figure staring across the fields, nursing a hatred so pure and white-hot that he would later confess it in a list of sins written in his private notebook, threatening my father and mother Smith to burn them and the house over them. Seed of the fire was planted here. The rage that would one day drive him to hunt counterfeiters and destroy his rivals was born in the lonely bedroom of Woolsthorpe. He became a watcher. Denied the warmth of human connection, he turned his gaze to the mechanical world. If he could not control the erratic behavior of his mother, He would control the motion of the wind, the water, and the sun. He began to carve his name into the stone walls of the manor, a desperate assertion of existence. I am here. I matter. He carved sundials into the wood, measuring the passing of time with obsessive precision, as if by tracking the minutes he could speed up the years until he was free. The villagers saw a quiet, sullen boy who threw rocks at the other children. They did not see the mind that was beginning to disassemble the reality around him, piece by piece, to see how it worked. Denied the comfort of a mother's embrace, the boy turned to the cold, reliable companionship of wood and metal. He retreated into the attic of the manor, a dusty, cobwebbed sanctuary where the only voices were the scratching of mice and the wind whistling through the eaves. Here, young Isaac began to build his own reality. He did not play games of tag or soldiers like the other boys of the village. Such frivolous things held no logic, no order. Instead, he took up the knife and the saw. He constructed intricate water clocks that dripped the seconds away with hypnotic precision, measuring the time he spent alone. He built a miniature windmill, a perfect replica of the one being constructed north of the village, but with a twist of cruel ingenuity. His version was powered not by the air, but by a mouse he had trapped. He called the mouse the miller, watching with a detached, clinical fascination as the creature ran on a treadwheel, driving the machinery. It was his first experiment in harnessing the chaotic forces of nature, bending living things to the will of the architect. But it was at night that the strangeness of the boy truly manifested, transforming him from a tinker into a phantom. While the village slept under the heavy darkness of the 17th century, a darkness deeper than any modern mind can conceive, Isaac was awake. He constructed paper lanterns, delicate spheres of crimped paper with candles burning inside. He tied them to the tails of kites and flew them high above the fields of Woolsthorpe. To the superstitious farmers looking up from their cottages, these floating lights were not the toys of a lonely child. They were comets, omens of doom, or perhaps the spirits of the dead returning to haunt the living. Isaac stood below in the shadows, holding the string, watching the fear ripple through the community. He felt a thrill of power, a realization that knowledge could be used to manipulate perception, to create magic out of mechanics. He was the puppet master of the night sky, conducting a symphony of light that only he understood. When he was 10 years old, the hated stepfather, Barnabas Smith, finally died. Hannah returned to Woolsthorpe, but she did not return alone. She brought with her 3 young children, the half-siblings who had occupied the space in her heart that should have belonged to Isaac. He was no longer the sole object of her neglect. He was now an inconvenience in a crowded house. Hannah, a woman of the earth who saw no value in books or gears, pulled him out of school. She intended to make a farmer of him. She sent him out into the pastures to tend the sheep, to clean the sties, to haggle at the market in Grantham. It was a disaster. The boy who could calculate the trajectory of a kite could not bring himself to care about the price of wool. He would hide under the hedges, lost in a book of mathematics or sketching geometrical diagrams in the dirt with a stick, while the sheep wandered off into the cornfields of the neighbors. He was fined for his negligence, scolded for his dreaminess, but he could not wake up. He was living in a different frequency. The physical world of mud and manure was a distraction. The real world was the abstract realm of numbers and lines, a place of purity where he could not be hurt, where the rules never changed. He looked at the sheep and saw only chaos. He looked at the stars and saw a puzzle waiting to be solved. Finally, a former schoolmaster and his uncle intervened, recognizing that trying to force Isaac Newton to farm was like trying to use a telescope to hammer a nail. They convinced Hannah to let him return to his studies, to prepare for university. And so, in June of 1661, the solitary boy of Woolsthorpe packed his few belongings and walked away from the manor. He left the kites and the water clocks behind, but he carried the isolation with him. He was headed for Cambridge, a bustling center of learning, yet he would arrive as he had lived, a singular point in space, disconnected, guarding his heart behind a wall of calculus, preparing to rewrite the universe to justify his own existence. Chapter 3. The Plague and the Garden. The summer of 1665 begins not with heat but with a sound. It is the tolling of the bells of St. Mary the Great, a low iron rhythm that echoes through the stone alleyways of Cambridge. At first, they ring only occasionally, marking the passing of a soul. But soon, the rhythm accelerates. The spaces between the tolls vanish, merging into a continuous, droning dirge that hangs over the university like a shroud. The Great Plague has arrived. It rides in on the fleas of rats, invisible and merciless, turning the bustling center of intellect into a ghost town. The colleges lock their gates, the lectures are silenced. The air, once filled with debates on Aristotle and theology, now reeks of vinegar and burning rosemary, the desperate, futile perfumes of the living trying to ward off the scent of the dead. Isaac Newton does not panic. He does not weep for the dying. He packs his trunks with a calm, methodical precision. He collects his books, his notebooks, and his prisms, treating them with more tenderness than he has ever shown a human being. He is 22 years old, an undistinguished student, a sizar who serves older students to pay for his keep. But as he rides away from the city, leaving the red crosses painted on the doors behind him, he is riding toward a destiny that will fracture time itself. He returns to the silence of Woolsthorpe, to the cold manor house of his unhappy childhood. The world is dying, but for Newton, the universe is just beginning to breathe. This period will be known to history as the Annus Mirabilis, the Year of Wonders. But to live through, it was to inhabit a strange, suspended reality. Woolsthorpe is an island of quiet in a sea of agony. There are no tutors here to tell him what to think. There are no distractions. There is only the long, flat horizon and the mind of a man who has decided to disassemble God's creation to see how it is made. He retreats into his room and closes the shutters, blocking out the sun, blocking out the plague, blocking out the mother who walks the floors downstairs. He bores a single, tiny hole in the wood, allowing a lone beam of white light to pierce the darkness. In the dusty air of that darkened room, Newton performs a violent act of dissection. He holds up a glass prism, a triangular wedge of cold clarity, and intercepts the beam. The light hits the glass and shatters. It explodes onto the far wall in a brilliant, impossible spectrum of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. For thousands of years, scholars believed that light was pure, white, and immutable, and that colors were merely corruptions added by the medium. Newton proves them wrong in the silence of his bedroom. He proves that white light is a mess, a chaotic mixture of all colors. He is not just playing with optics. He is breaking the rainbow. He is proving that appearance is a lie, that the senses cannot be trusted, and that the true nature of reality is hidden, waiting to be revealed by the knife of mathematics. He spends days in this camera obscura, his eyes dilated in the gloom, staring at the bands of color until they burn into his retinas. He is the first human to truly see light, to understand its corpuscular nature. But the isolation is doing something to him. The boundary between the observer and the observed is dissolving. He begins to experiment on his own body. He takes a bodkin, a long, thick needle used for sewing, and slips it between his eye and the bone of his eye socket, pressing it against the back of his eyeball to alter the curvature of his vision, just to see what circles of color will appear. He risks blindness, risks madness, driven by a terrifying curiosity that values truth over flesh. He is probing the mechanics of perception, willing to destroy his own sight to understand how seeing works. Outside the darkened room, the orchard of Woolsthorpe is heavy with fruit. The plague has not touched the trees. Life, indifferent to human suffering, continues to ripen. Newton steps out into the garden in the late afternoon, the sun casting long, golden shadows across the grass. He sits beneath an ancient apple tree, the flower of Kent, its gnarled branches twisting against the sky. The air is still. There is no wind. And then it happens. A single apple snaps from its stem and falls. It strikes the earth with a dull, heavy thud. It is a sound so ordinary, so mundane that a billion people have heard it and ignored it. But in the hypersensitized mind of Isaac Newton, starved of conversation and tuned to the abstract frequencies of the cosmos, the sound is a thunderclap. He does not see a piece of fruit falling. He sees a question tearing a hole in the fabric of the world. Why does it fall straight down? Why does it not fall sideways or upwards? Why is it drawn constantly toward the center of the earth? He looks up past the branches to the pale ghost of the moon hanging in the daylight sky, and in a moment of terrifying, vertiginous insight, the two objects, the apple and the moon, merge in his mind. He realizes that the force pulling the apple to the grass is the same force holding the moon in its orbit. The moon is falling, just like the apple. It is falling toward the earth every second of every day, but its forward velocity is just fast enough to miss the horizon, locking it into an eternal, circular descent. This is not just science. It is a vision. It is the realization that the universe is connected by an invisible, occult force that reaches across the vacuum of space to bind matter together. He calls it gravitas, gravity, but he cannot explain what it is. It acts instantly over vast distances without any physical medium to carry it. To the scientists of his day, who believe that objects must touch to affect one another, this smells of sorcery. It is action at a distance, a concept that belongs in the grimoires of magicians, not the journals of the Royal Society. Newton knows this. He knows that he has discovered a truth so profound that it borders on the supernatural. He is holding the invisible strings of God's puppet show. He rushes back inside, leaving the apple to rot in the grass. He dips his quill into the ink and begins to calculate. He draws diagrams of orbits, of inverse square laws, covering page after page with the geometry of the heavens. He works with a feverish intensity, forgetting to eat, forgetting to sleep. The plague is forgotten. The death toll in London is forgotten. The only thing that exists is the math. He is building a cage for the cosmos, trapping the planets in equations that will hold them still for eternity. He is 23 years old, sitting in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, and he has just solved the riddle of the universe. But he does not tell a soul. He closes the notebook, locks it in a chest, and hides it away. The world is not ready. The silence of Woolsthorpe swallows the secret, and Newton returns to the shadows, the keeper of a truth too heavy to share. Chapter 4: The Crimson Furnace. The silence of the apple orchard is replaced by the roar of the fire. We leave the cool, intellectual air of the study and descend into the garden behind Newton's rooms at Trinity College, where a small, wooden shed leans against the stone wall. To the passing student or the casual observer, it is a tool shed, a place for gardening implements and forgotten lumber. But to Isaac Newton, it is the Athanor, the cosmic oven. Inside, the air is thick enough to chew, a poisonous soup of sulfur, charcoal dust, and vaporized mercury that clings to the skin and coats the lungs. The heat is oppressive, a physical weight that presses down on the chest, yet Newton stands before the crucible, wrapped in a heavy gown, his face illuminated by the crimson glow of the coals. He is no longer the young boy playing with kites, nor the student fracturing light with a prism. He is a man possessed by a hunger that mathematics cannot satisfy. For 3 decades, while the world celebrated him as the father of reason, Newton lived a double life in this shed. He employed a young assistant, a distant relative named Humphrey Newton, whose sole job was to feed the fire. The fire, Humphrey would later recount with a shudder, scarcely ever went out. For 6 weeks at a time, through the dead of night and the heat of noon, the furnace roared, turning the shed into a pocket of hell on earth. Newton would sleep for only an hour or two, waking up to check the color of the flame, to stir the molten metal, to watch for the moment of transformation. What he is seeking in the fire is not chemistry. Chemistry is a vulgar trade, a science of mixing and measuring for practical gain. Newton is practicing chymistry, the ancient, sacred art of alchemy. He is looking for the vegetative spirit, the invisible life force that he believes lies trapped inside all matter. He believes that metals are not dead things, but living entities that grow in the earth like plants. Gold is the only metal that has reached maturity, the only metal that has a pure soul. Lead, iron, and tin are unripe, diseased versions of gold. And Newton believes that if he can strip away their impurities, if he can kill the metal in the fire and resurrect it, he can accelerate nature's process. He can play God. He leans over the crucible, his eyes unprotected, staring into the bubbling silver liquid of the mercury. He is trying to create the star Regulus of antimony. It is a precise, dangerous operation. He mixes iron ore with antimony sulfide and fuses them at high temperatures, adding saltpeter to purify the mixture. When it cools, if the ritual has been performed correctly, the metal crystallizes into a perfect, glittering star on the surface of the Regulus. To Newton, this star is not a quirk of crystallization. It is a sign from the heavens. It is the signature of the divine, a signal that the metal has been prepared to receive the seed of gold. He works with a terrifying intimacy with the materials. He tastes them. He records the flavor of the gray powder and the sweetness of the lead salts in his notebooks, seemingly unaware or indifferent to the fact that he is ingesting slow-acting poison. His hair is unkempt, his stockings hang loose around his ankles, and he often forgets to eat for days. He is consuming himself to feed the great work. In the flickering light of the furnace, the great mathematician dissolves. There is no calculus here. There is only the ancient, rhythmic breathing of the bellows, and the belief that the universe is a riddle written in matter, waiting to be solved by fire. The fire is a demanding god, but the notebook is a silent confessor. When the crucible cools and the fumes settle low against the floorboards, Newton retreats to his desk to record the results. But he does not write in the clear, undeniable English of the Principia. He writes in the language of the initiates, a coded dialect of dragons, doves, and green lions. To the uninitiated, these pages look like the ravings of a madman, filled with drawings of kings swimming in seas of blood and hermaphroditic figures holding the sun and moon. But to Newton, this is the precision of the soul. He writes of the net, a microscopic structure he believes holds the universe together, a literal mesh that traps the spirit within the body. He is hunting the green lion, his code name for a potent solvent derived from vitriol and mercury, which he believes can devour gold and cause it to putrefy. In alchemy, putrefaction is not death. It is the black stage, the negrito, the necessary rot that precedes resurrection. Newton spends years dissolving gold, watching it turn black, waiting for it to be reborn as the philosopher's stone. He is not driven by greed. He has no interest in turning lead into gold coins to line his pockets. He leaves his salary untouched in a box in his room. He wants the stone because it is the physical proof of God's active presence in the world. If he can turn lead into gold, he proves that the universe is not a dead machine ticking away in the dark. He proves that matter is alive, that it can be redeemed, that it can be saved. But the furnace demands a price. The heavy metals he inhales day after day are settling into his bones, weaving their own net into his nervous system. The mercury, volatile and shivering, is the god of thieves and tricksters, and it is playing a long, slow trick on Newton's mind. His hands begin to tremble. His letters become erratic. He sleeps less and less, his mind racing in tight, paranoid loops. He stands in the red glow of the coals, a silhouette against the fire, looking less like a scientist and more like a blacksmith forging his own chains. The tragedy of the crimson furnace is that it gave him nothing but ash. For all his genius, for all his sleepless nights, the gold never resurrected. The stone never appeared. He was trying to force the door of heaven with a crowbar of iron, but the door remained shut. As the years passed, the laboratory became less a place of discovery and more a prison of obsession. He was the greatest mind of his generation, trapped in a shed, breathing poison, chasing a ghost that had haunted humanity for 1,000 years. He conquered gravity, but he could not conquer the lead in his crucible. Chapter 5. The Emerald Tablet. The fire of the furnace is elemental, brute, and physical, but the fire of the mind is silent and consumes without smoke. We leave the suffocating heat of the shed and return to the stillness of Newton's chambers, where the curtains are drawn against the Cambridge day. Here, the air does not smell of sulfur. but of dust, the dry, papery scent of centuries dissolving into the dark. On the desk, illuminated by a single, unwavering candle, lies a sheet of paper that would destroy his reputation in an instant if it were ever nailed to the church door. It is not a mathematical proof. It is a translation. Newton is hunched over the parchment, his quills scratching the surface with a rhythmic intensity. He is translating the Smaragdine table, the emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. This is the foundational text of Alchemy, a cryptic, mystical poem said to have been found in a tomb in Hebron, clutched in the hands of the corpse of Hermes himself. To the rationalists of the burgeoning Enlightenment, this text is a relic of superstition, a piece of poetic nonsense. But to Newton, it is the Rosetta Stone of the universe. He writes the opening line in English, his handwriting cramped and urgent. "'Tis true without lying, certain and most true. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below to do the miracles of one only thing." This is the doctrine of correspondence, the belief that the microcosm of the laboratory mirrors the macrocosm of the stars. Newton does not read this as a metaphor. He reads it as a manual. He believes that the ancients, the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, the Phoenicians, possessed a pure, uncorrupted knowledge of physics that had been lost to the sins of man. He calls it the prisca sapientia, the pristine wisdom. In his mind, he is not discovering the laws of gravity, he is recovering them. He believes that Moses knew the law of gravity. He believes that Pythagoras knew the inverse square law, hiding the secret in the harmony of his musical spheres to protect it from the unworthy. Newton sees himself not as a pioneer of the future, but as a priest of the past. He is an archaeologist of the intellect, digging through the strata of myth and scripture to find the golden veins of truth that God laid down at the moment of creation. He studies the dimensions of the Great Pyramid of Giza, convinced that its cubits hold the exact measurement of the Earth's circumference. He learns Hebrew to read the Talmud, hunting for clues in the genealogy of the patriarchs. He is building a bridge across time, reaching back through the fog of the Dark Ages to grasp the hand of Noah. It is a lonely, terrifying arrogance. To believe that you are the sole inheritor of a lost civilization requires a mind that is entirely self-contained, a mind that needs no validation from the living. He looks at his colleagues at Trinity, men in wigs discussing politics and theology, and sees children playing with shadows. They do not know that the world is a cryptogram. They do not know that the emerald tablet is not just a poem, but a recipe for the creation of the world itself. Newton believes that if he can decode the alchemical symbolism, he can reverse engineer the creation. He can understand how God spoke light into existence. He sits back in his chair, the quill dripping ink onto the page. The silence of the room is heavy with the weight of ghosts. He is surrounded by invisible masters, by the spirits of long-dead magi who whisper that the key to the universe is not in the telescope, but in the text. The translation of the Emerald Tablet is merely the prologue to a much larger, more dangerous obsession. Newton pushes the parchment aside and unrolls a massive scroll across his desk, weighing down the corners with heavy brass geometric instruments. It is a floor plan, drawn with the same meticulous, razor-sharp lines that defined his optical diagrams. But this is not a diagram of a lens or a comet's path. It is a blueprint of the Temple of Solomon. For Newton, the temple was not just a building of cedar and gold constructed by an ancient king. It was a chronometer of history and a model of the cosmos. He believed that Solomon, the wisest of men, had encoded the proportions of the solar system into the architecture of the sanctuary. The fire in the courtyard represented the sun. The arrangement of the lamps represented the planets. If Newton could determine the exact length of the sacred cubit used by the Hebrew Masons, he believed he could calculate the size of the earth and the distance to the stars. He spent years studying Jewish history, learning the exact measurements of the walls, the gates, and the inner sanctum, convinced that God was a geometer who had hidden his blueprints in stone. But his gaze does not stop at the architecture. It moves to the timeline. To Isaac Newton, The Bible was not a collection of moral fables or spiritual allegories. It was a data set. It was an encrypted message containing the entire history of humanity, past and future. He treats the prophecies of Daniel and the revelation of St. John not as mystical visions, but as complex historical equations that can be solved if one possesses the correct variables. He calculates the rise and fall of empires, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, fitting them into a rigid chronological framework. He is trying to determine the date of the apocalypse. He works the numbers again and again, the candlelight flickering over pages covered in sums. He counts the times and half a time. He correlates the prophetic weeks with historical years, and finally he arrives at a number. He writes it down, not with fear, but with the satisfaction of a man balancing a ledger. 2060. The year the world as we know it will end, the year the corruption of the church will be swept away and the kingdom of saints established on earth. He sits back, the silence of the room vibrating with the weight of the secret. He is the keeper of the timeline. He knows when the curtain will fall. While his contemporaries in London are building the Bank of England and establishing the coffee houses of the Enlightenment, Newton is living in the shadow of the end times. He sees the world around him not as a permanent state, but as a passing vapor, a brief, chaotic interlude before the return of the ancient order. This is the ultimate paradox of the Emerald Tablet. It taught him that which is below is like that which is above. By understanding the ancient past, he believes he has conquered the future. He has dissolved time just as he tried to dissolve gold. But as he rolls up the scroll of the temple, a cold draft moves through the room. He knows that these papers are dangerous. To claim that the church has corrupted the truth, to claim that the ancients knew more than the modern bishops, is to walk the edge of heresy. He blows out the candle, plunging the room into darkness. The secrets of Solomon are safe for another night, hidden in the mind of a man who is slowly becoming a stranger to his own century. Chapter 6. The Heretic in the Chapel. The silence of the study gives way to the hollow echo of the chapel. It is Sunday morning at Trinity College, and the bells are calling the faithful to prayer. The heavy oak doors swing open, swallowing the light of the Cambridge morning, admitting a procession of scholars in black gowns. They move like a dark river, heads bowed, whispering the liturgy of the Church of England. Among them walks Isaac Newton. He wears the same robes, bows his head at the same intervals, and recites the same creeds. But inside the chest of the Lucasian professor beats the heart of a radical heretic. To the world, he is the pride of the Anglican establishment. To himself, he is a spy in the house of God. Newton walks the aisle, his eyes fixed on the altar, but his mind is screaming against the very words he is forced to speak. He has spent years in the archives, applying the same forensic intensity to the Bible that he applied to the motion of the planets, and he has found a flaw in the architecture of the faith. He has concluded that the central doctrine of Christianity, the Holy Trinity, is a lie, a fraud, a corruption introduced by the Church in the 4th century to confuse the faithful and dilute the power of the one true God. He believes that Jesus Christ was not God. He believes that worshiping Christ as the equal of the Father is idolatry, a sin so profound it risks damnation. Yet every Sunday he stands in this chapel, surrounded by men who would destroy him if they knew his thoughts, and nods as the priest intones, "Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost." It is a performance of terrifying discipline. Newton is living a life of profound spiritual isolation, holding a secret that is far more dangerous than his alchemy. Alchemy might get him mocked. Arianism, the denial of Christ's divinity, could get him stripped of his fellowship, imprisoned, or worse. He kneels on the cold stone, clasping his hands. The friction between his public mask and his private truth is tearing him apart. He writes millions of words on theology, more than he ever wrote on science, filling notebooks with arguments against Athanasius, the bishop he blames for the corruption of the Bible. He tracks the changes in the Greek manuscripts like a detective hunting a forger, proving to his own satisfaction that the scriptures had been tampered with. He is the ultimate Protestant, protesting not just the Pope, but the very foundations of orthodoxy. He is a man of one God, a solitary monotheist in a Trinitarian world, standing alone against 1,500 years of history. The irony is cruel. Newton is required by the statutes of Trinity College to take holy orders, to become an ordained priest to keep his position. The deadline is approaching. If he refuses, he loses everything: his home, his laboratory, his salary, his identity. If he accepts, he commits a mortal sin by swearing an oath to a doctrine he despises. He is trapped in a divine vice. He paces his rooms at night, the weight of the decision crushing him. He appeals to the king, Charles II, for a special dispensation, a loophole that would allow the Lucasian professor to remain a layman. It is a desperate, long-shot gamble. He waits, the days ticking down, the shadow of the church looming over him like the executioner's axe. He is the man who explained the tides, yet he is drowning in a theological riptide he cannot control. And then a miracle arrives. It does not come in a flash of light or a burning bush, but in a sealed packet delivered by a royal courier. The hands that break the wax seal are trembling, expecting a dismissal, a condemnation, perhaps even an order for arrest. Instead, Isaac Newton reads the words of King Charles II. The king, a man known more for his mistresses and spaniels than his theology, has granted the dispensation. The Lucasian professor is hereby exempted from the requirement of holy orders. It is a reprieve so sudden, so absolute, that it feels like divine intervention. In a single stroke of a pen, the noose is loosened. Newton can remain at Trinity. He can keep his rooms, his salary, and his laboratory. He does not have to stand before the bishop and lie to God. He sits in his chair, the letter resting on his knees, breathing in the damp air of the room as if it were the sweetest perfume. He has been saved by the crown, but the salvation deepens the shadow. He has been given permission to stay, but he has not been given permission to speak. The secret of his heresy must now be guarded with even greater ferocity. He has fooled the church, fooled the university, and fooled the world. He is a ghost in the machine of the establishment, a Unitarian operative hiding in plain sight. Safe from the immediate threat of expulsion, Newton plunges deeper into the labyrinth of his private theology. He returns to his desk, pushing aside the diagrams of optics to make room for the history of the early church. He is obsessed with the figure of Athanasius, the 4th-century bishop who championed the doctrine of the Trinity. To Newton, Athanasius is not a saint. He is a villain of cosmic proportions, a forger and a corrupter who introduced metaphysical nonsense into the simple, pure faith of the apostles. Newton writes furiously, his quill stabbing the paper as he accuses the church fathers of intellectual fraud. He counts the times the scriptures were altered, tracking the corruption like a disease spreading through the body of the text. His God is not the triune God of the stained glass windows. His God is a God of dominion, a singular, all-powerful, terrifyingly remote monarch who rules the universe with absolute authority. This is the God of the Principia, a God of law, of geometry, of irresistible force. Newton's theology and his physics are mirrors of each other. Just as gravity is a single, universal force that binds the planets, God is a single, universal will that binds history. There is no room in Newton's cosmos for the messy, shared divinity of the Trinity. There is only the one. He spends his nights in communion with this lonely deity. He writes of the whore of Babylon, identifying the corrupted church with the apocalyptic beast of Revelation. He believes that the true religion has been driven underground, preserved only by a remnant of wise men, men like himself. He is not merely studying the Bible. He is preparing a legal case for the day of judgment. He compiles valid evidence, cross-references testimonies, and builds a mountain of proof to exonerate the original faith. It is a staggering, silent labor. Millions of words, stacked in piles that reach toward the ceiling, written by a man who officially subscribes to the 39 Articles of the Anglican Church. But the isolation is taking a toll on his soul. A man who cannot speak his truth is a man who begins to lose the shape of his own humanity. He walks the courts of Trinity like a spectre, his hair uncombed, his shoes untied, muttering to himself as he passes the students. They laugh at the eccentric professor, the genius who forgets to eat his dinner. They do not know that he is arguing with ghosts. They do not know that he is fighting a war against 15 centuries of dogma, alone in his room, armed only with a pen and a terrifying, unyielding certainty. He has saved his career, but he is slowly walling himself in. The chapel bells ring outside, calling the faithful to worship a God Newton believes is a fiction, while he sits in the dark, worshiping a God of silence and gravity who offers no comfort, only command. Chapter 7. The Duel with the Counterfeiter. The silence of the library is replaced by the deafening, grinding roar of the city. We leave the stone cloisters of Cambridge and descend into the soot-choked heart of London, into the shadow of the Tower. It is 1696, and Isaac Newton has abandoned the ivory tower for the iron fortress. He has accepted the post of warden of the Royal Mint, a position traditionally viewed as a gentle sinecure for retired gentlemen, a reward for a life of service that required little more than signing papers and collecting a salary. But Isaac Newton does not know how to rest. He does not know how to be a figurehead. He walks into the Mint, a place of furnace heat and hammering noise, and sees not a retirement home, but a machine that is broken. England is in the grip of a financial catastrophe. The silver currency, the literal lifeblood of the nation, is rotting away. For decades, clippers have been taking shears to the edges of coins, shaving off slivers of silver to melt down and sell, leaving the currency jagged, underweight, and worthless. The economy is collapsing. Riots are breaking out in the markets. The government has ordered a great recoinage, a massive, desperate operation to recall every old coin in the kingdom, melt them down, and strike millions of new ones. It is a logistical nightmare that requires a mind capable of organizing chaos. Enter the author of the Principia. Newton attacks the problem with the same ferocious intensity he applied to the orbit of the moon. He transforms the Mint from a sleepy bureaucracy into a factory of maximum efficiency. He studies the motion of the workers, calculating the seconds it takes to roll an ingot or stamp a coin. He reorganizes the shifts, doubling the output. He sleeps in the tower, waking to the sound of the presses, his mind now occupied not with the geometry of the heavens, but with the geometry of production. He is saving the pound sterling, but the threat is not just logistical, it is criminal. And to save the coin, the philosopher must become a hunter. Standing in his way is William Challoner, the greatest counterfeiter in English history. Challoner is everything Newton is not: flamboyant, charming, a creature of the London gutters who has risen by his wits. He is a master trickster who mocks the law, printing fake banknotes and stamping false guineas with an artistry that rivals the Mint itself. He sees Newton as a dusty academic, a naive professor who can be easily outmaneuvered. He laughs at the warden. He taunts him in pamphlets, challenging his authority, daring the great mathematician to catch him. It is a fatal miscalculation. Challoner thinks he is playing a game with a bureaucrat. He does not realize he has awakened the crimson furnace within Newton's soul. Newton takes the challenge personally. He views counterfeiting not just as a crime against the state, but as a form of alchemy gone wrong, a perversion of the truth, a false transmutation. He decides that Challoner must be destroyed. And so, the man who wrote the laws of motion descends into the underworld. He puts aside his Bible and his telescope, and picks up the tools of the spy master. The academic gown is discarded for the heavy cloak of the night watchman. Newton begins to frequent the gin shops and the taverns of Cheapside and Southwark, places that smell of unwashed bodies and stale ale, a far cry from the lavender-scented air of Cambridge. He is not there to drink. He is there to listen. He recruits a network of spies, a ragged army of pickpockets, prostitutes, and turncoats who are willing to sell their secrets for a silver shilling. He transforms the warden's office into an interrogation chamber. Suspects are dragged in from Newgate Prison, shackled and terrified, expecting a bureaucrat. Instead, they find a man with eyes like flint, a man who knows the exact weight of a lie. Newton applies the scientific method to criminal investigation. He creates a dossier on Challoner, mapping his associates, his habits, his hideouts. He cross-references testimonies, looking for contradictions with the same obsessive precision he used to hunt for errors in the Gregorian calendar. He is relentless. He pays for the clothes of informants. He bribes jailers. He becomes a creature of the shadows, absorbing the grime of London into his soul. The man who calculated the weight of the earth is now calculating the price of a man's loyalty. Challoner, sensing the net tightening, tries every trick in his repertoire. He offers to work for the government. He accuses Newton of corruption. He tries to bribe the very man who is hunting him, but he does not understand the nature of his enemy. Newton is not motivated by money. He is motivated by order. To Newton, Challoner is an anomaly in the system, a variable that refuses to be integrated, and anomalies must be corrected. The trap snaps shut in 1699. Newton has gathered enough evidence to hang Challoner 10 times over. The counterfeiter is arrested and thrown into Newgate, the hell above ground. The trial is a formality. Newton does not attend the hanging at Tyburn. He stays in his office at the Mint, listening to the distant roar of the crowd. He feels no joy, only the cold satisfaction of a chaotic equation finally balanced to zero. As Challoner swings from the rope, choking on his last breath, Newton dips his quill and makes a final entry in his ledger. The metal is pure again. The coin is safe. But the man who saved it has seen the darkness in the human heart, and he knows that no amount of fire can ever truly purify it. Chapter 8. The Mathematical Veil. The war with the counterfeiters is won, but the war for the soul of the universe continues in silence. Isaac Newton sits in the president's chair of the Royal Society, a position of supreme authority, surrounded by men who worship the ground his buckled shoes walk upon. To them, he is the light of the age, the man who banished the shadows of superstition with the cold, hard beam of reason. They hold up his Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica like a Bible of the New World, a testament to a universe that runs like a perfect, predictable clock. But as Newton looks out at the sea of powdered wigs and eager faces, he feels a profound, biting irony. They are worshipping the mask, not the man. They are celebrating the translation, unaware that the original text is written in a language they would call madness. The Principia is a masterpiece of deception. On the surface, it is a rigorous geometric proof of the laws of motion. It describes a cosmos where planets sweep out equal areas in equal times, where every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It is safe. It is clean. It is sterile. But beneath the rigid architecture of the calculus lies a secret that Newton deliberately buried. The central pillar of his system, gravity, is not a mechanical concept. It is an alchemical one. In the 17th century, science was defined by mechanism. Things moved only if they were pushed or pulled by other physical things. A cart moved because a horse pulled it. A leaf fluttered because the wind struck it. But gravity violated this rule. Gravity reached across the vacuum of space, grabbing the moon without touching it. It was an invisible, immaterial force acting instantly over vast distances. To the rationalists of Europe, men like René Descartes and Gottfried Leibniz, this was occult. It was magic. It was a return to the dark ages of spirits and ghosts. They attacked Newton, demanding to know the mechanism of gravity. How does it work? What carries the force? Newton's famous reply, hypotheses non fingo, I frame no hypotheses, was a lie of omission. He had framed a hypothesis. He believed that gravity was the active principle, the will of God acting constantly in the world to prevent the universe from collapsing into chaos. He believed it was the same vegetative spirit he had hunted in his furnace, the same invisible force that caused chemical reactions in the crucible. But he knew he could not say this. He could not tell the Royal Society that the force holding them to the earth was the breath of God. So he cast a veil over the truth. He translated the mystical concept of attraction into the mathematical language of force. He stripped the spirit of its name and dressed it in geometry. He gave them the how, but he hid the why. He sits in his study, tracing the lines of a diagram with a finger stained by years of ink and chemical burns. He has created a clockwork universe for the public, but he hates the clockwork. A clock implies a clockmaker who winds it up and walks away. Newton's God is not an absentee landlord. His God is present, active, intervening to correct the irregularities of the planets, feeding the sun with comets to keep it burning. He has built a prison of logic for the world, but he has kept the key for himself. He sees the spiritual agents everywhere in the behavior of light, in the fermentation of vegetables, in the cohesion of matter. But to the world, he presents only the dead, heavy shell of the law. He is the greatest magician of history, not because he performed miracles, but because he convinced the world that magic did not exist, all while secretly believing it was the only thing that mattered. Chapter 9. The Mercury Madness. The mind that measured the heavens is now trapped in a room that is shrinking. It is the autumn of 1693, and the darkness has moved from the corners of the laboratory into the center of Isaac Newton's skull. He has not slept for 5 nights. When he closes his eyes, he does not see blackness. He sees flashes of phantom light, geometric shapes that twist and scream, and the lingering, mocking face of the sun he stared at for too long. His hands, once steady enough to grind lenses to within a millionth of an inch, now tremble with a violent, rhythmic palsy. He tries to hold a cup of water, but the ripples on the surface look like tidal waves, terrifying and immense. The black year has arrived. The bridge between genius and madness, always narrow, has finally collapsed under the weight of the metals he has inhaled. The poison is no longer in the crucible. It is in his blood. For decades he has breathed the vapor of mercury, the quicksilver that alchemists believed was the spirit of the world. But mercury is a treacherous god. It attacks the nervous system, eating away at the myelin sheaths of the brain, causing a condition known as erethism. The symptoms are specific and cruel: extreme irritability, pathological shyness, tremors, and profound paranoia. Newton is experiencing them all. He sits in his chair, wrapped in a blanket, convinced that the world is conspiring against him. He hears whispers in the draft of the chimney. He sees plots in the arrangement of his books. The universe, which he once saw as a divine order, has dissolved into a chaotic, predatory web, and he is the fly trapped in the center. He dips his quill into the ink, but the words that spill out are not the elegant Latin of the Principia. They are broken, feverish English, the scrawlings of a man drowning in his own bile. He writes to his closest friends, John Locke and Samuel Pepys, men who love him and revere him. But in the distorted mirror of his mercury-poisoned mind, they are monsters. He accuses Locke, the gentle philosopher of tolerance, of trying to embroil him with women, a terrified, puritanical delusion that his friend is trying to trap him in a sexual scandal to destroy his reputation. He writes to Pepys, the diarist, claiming that Pepys is trying to get him arrested. "I am extremely troubled at the embroilment I am in," he scrawls, "and have neither ate nor slept well this 12-month, nor have my former consistency of mind." It is a heartbreaking spectacle. The greatest intellect in human history has been reduced to a frightened child, lashing out at the shadows. He paces the floor of his rooms at Trinity, his hair wild, his clothes stained with the ash of the furnace he can no longer tend. He believes that his mind is gone, that the great ocean of truth has washed over him and pulled him under. He is experiencing the negrito, the black putrefaction, not in a flask, but in his own soul. He has dissolved his own ego in the acid of his obsession, but unlike the gold in his experiments, he does not know if he will ever reconstitute. The madness does not end with a scream, but with a whimper. The letters to Locke and Pepys are the frantic signals of a ship going down, but the ship does not sink. It drifts. Slowly, painfully, the fog in Newton's mind begins to lift. The tremors in his hands subside just enough to hold a spoon. The paranoia recedes from a roaring boil to a simmering, low-level distrust that will remain with him for the rest of his life. He emerges from the black year of 1693, but he has left a part of himself behind in the darkness. The young, fearless explorer who stuck needles in his eyes and tasted arsenic is dead. In his place stands a rigid, iron-willed icon, a man who realizes that the pursuit of the absolute has nearly destroyed him. He makes a decision that changes the trajectory of his life and the history of science. He decides to leave the laboratory. He looks at the furnace, cold and dark in the corner of the garden, and sees it not as a gateway to God, but as a mouth that tried to swallow him whole. He packs away the crucibles. He locks the alchemical notebooks in a heavy wooden chest, burying the green lion and the star Regulus under layers of silence. He petitions for a post in London, desperate to escape the isolation of Trinity College. He trades the solitude of the scholar for the noise of the mint, trades the search for the philosopher's stone for the hunting of counterfeiters. It is a flight from the self. He immerses himself in the mundane, bureaucratic world of men and money to keep the demons at bay. But the mercury madness leaves a scar that never fades. Newton becomes the autocrat of English science. He rules the Royal Society with a terrifying intolerance for dissent. When the astronomer John Flamsteed refuses to hand over his data, Newton uses his political power to force him, crushing the man's career without a flicker of remorse. When Gottfried Leibniz claims to have invented calculus independently, Newton launches a vicious, anonymous propaganda campaign to destroy Leibniz's reputation, writing the committee's report himself. The poison of the mercury may have left his blood, but the toxicity remains in his spirit. He has seen the chaos at the edge of the universe, and now he demands absolute, total control over the world around him. The man who survived the breakdown is harder, colder, and more dangerous than the man who entered it. He has conquered his own madness by projecting it outward, turning the universe into a court where he is the only judge. Chapter 10: The Last Magician. The fire has returned. We are at the end of the journey in a quiet house in Kensington, London. The year is 1727. Isaac Newton is 84 years old, a frail, white-haired monument to a century that has already passed him by. He sits by the hearth, just as he did in the aftermath of the disaster at Trinity so many years ago, but this time the burning is deliberate. His hands, spotted with age and trembling with the remnants of the mercury palsy, feed the flames. He is burning his letters. He is burning the evidence of his quarrels, his doubts, and perhaps the last lingering traces of his heresy. He knows that death is waiting in the hallway, and he knows that history is waiting behind it. He is curating his own ghost. He is in agony. A stone in his bladder the size of a pea is slowly killing him, causing pain so intense that sweat runs down his face in rivulets, soaking his collar. Yet he does not cry out. He bears the torture with a stoic, terrifying silence, the same silence he imposed on the universe. He refuses the comfort of the church. When the Anglican priests come to offer him the last rites, the final sacrament to ease his soul into heaven, he turns them away. It is a scandalous refusal for a man of his standing, but Newton cannot take the bread and wine. To do so would be to acknowledge the Trinity, to bow to a false god in his final moments. He will die as he lived, a Unitarian, a heretic, a man whose true church had a congregation of one. He looks into the fire and sees the faces of the men he destroyed, Hooke, Flamsteed, Leibniz. He sees the shadow of the gallows where Challoner swung. He sees the endless, looping calculations of the apocalypse. He has been hailed as the new Moses, the man who brought the tablets of the law down from the mountain of mathematics. Alexander Pope has already written the famous couplet that will define his legacy. Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, "Let Newton be," and all was light. But Newton knows the darkness is still there. He famously whispers to his niece, Catherine, that he feels like a small boy playing on the seashore, diverting himself by finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. It is a beautiful, humble image, but it is also an admission of defeat. The ocean remains. The alchemical key was never found. The green lion never devoured the sun. On March 20, 1727, the pain ceases. The clockwork heart stops ticking. Isaac Newton dies in his sleep, escaping the gravity of the earth at last. They bury him in Westminster Abbey in a tomb fit for a king, surrounded by the monarchs and poets of England. They carve a monument of marble that shows him reclining, surrounded by cherubs holding prisms and telescopes, the instruments of reason. The world mourns the scientist. They do not know they have buried a sorcerer. The body rots, but the paper survives. For 200 years, a massive iron-bound chest sits in the family estate of the Earl of Portsmouth, passed down through the generations of Newton's remote descendants. It is known simply as the Portsmouth chest. It contains the papers that were deemed not fit to be printed, the millions of words on alchemy, prophecy, and heresy that Newton had hidden away. The family guards it nervously, aware that its contents could tarnish the reputation of their illustrious ancestor. They peek inside, see the drawings of dragons and the rants about the apocalypse, and quickly close the lid. The myth of the rational genius remains intact. The Enlightenment is built on his shoulders, a clean, white marble statue erected on a foundation of suppressed magic. The truth, like the alchemical spirit, cannot be trapped forever. In 1936, the chest is finally opened. The papers are put up for auction at Sotheby's in London. The scientific community is largely uninterested. They want the math, not the madness. But one man sees the catalog and understands what it means. John Maynard Keynes, the great economist, begins to buy. He buys the Crimson Notes. He buys the translations of Hermes. He buys the calculations of the end of the world. He takes them back to his study, and as he reads, the marble statue of Newton shatters. Keynes is stunned. He expects to find the first modern scientist. Instead, he finds a man whose mind was one of the last of the Bobbies of the Middle Ages. He realizes that Newton did not see the world as a machine. He saw it as a riddle posed by God to a select brotherhood of initiates. In a lecture to the Royal Society, Keynes delivers the verdict that rewrites history. Newton was not the first of the age of reason. He was the last of the magicians. The secret is out. The fire in the grate at Trinity, the smoke of the furnace, the whisper of the heretic in the chapel, it all rushes back into the light. We finally see the whole man. We see that the Principia was not a rejection of the mystical, but a desperate attempt to contain it. We see that the gravity that holds us to the earth was discovered by a man trying to find a way to heaven. The candle flickers one last time in the room at Kensington, casting a long, dancing shadow against the wall. The script is finished, but the question remains. We live in the world Newton built, a world of satellites, calculus, and cold, hard laws. We trust in the machine. But somewhere in the quiet spaces between the stars, in the dark corners of the atom, the mystery still breathes. Isaac Newton spent his life trying to turn lead into gold, and in the end he failed. But perhaps his failure was his greatest gift. He showed us that even the greatest mind in history could not completely decode the universe. He showed us that at the bottom of the equation there is not a period but a question mark. He left us the laws of motion, yes, but he also left us the silence of the boy looking at the moon, the silence of a man staring into the fire, the silence of a world that is stranger, deeper, and more magical than we will ever know. The fire is out, the ash is cold, but the search continues.